Kyle Renshaw slammed the sell order with a theatrical flourish, then turned to the cleaning woman still holding her mop. "You don't belong in this room, let alone in my trades. Go mop somewhere else." His colleagues howled with laughter as he leaned back, eyes locked on the screen, waiting for the stock to plummet. 12 seconds later, a circuit breaker fired, the trade suspended, and when the market reopened, Renshaw watched $47 million evaporate in real time. He turned to find Ms. Pearl still standing there, wringing out her mop. She had spent 15 years as a quantitative analyst before an illness bankrupted her. She didn't need to say a word. "Don't go anywhere." This is the story of a $47 million mistake, a hedge fund titan who thought he knew everything, and the woman holding a mop who actually did. In a world where algorithms trade fortunes in microseconds, the biggest lesson that day wasn't in the code. It was in the person the code forgot to even see. The 47th floor of One Manhattan West doesn't just scrape the sky, it looks down on it. This is where Apex Capital runs money for billionaires, sovereign wealth funds, and the kind of family offices that don't appear on any registry. The windows are floor to ceiling, the coffee is imported from a single farm in Panama, and the air hums with the quiet certainty that everyone in the room is the smartest person you've ever met, and they know it. Kyle Renshaw was 32 years old, MIT undergrad, Wharton MBA, and by his own estimation, the best tactical short seller in the building. He wore Brunello Cucinelli suits without socks and kept a custom keyboard on his desk with mechanical switches that clicked loud enough to announce every trade he made. His colleagues called him Rain Man behind his back, partly for the numbers, mostly for the social grace of a man who had never once doubted his own opinion. In the previous quarter, he had made the firm $81 million betting against a failing electric vehicle startup. The framed deal toy was still on his shelf, the glass still smudge-free. He had been promoted twice in 18 months and had recently started flying to Miami on weekends in a fractional jet share he couldn't quite afford but had convinced himself was an investment in his brand. The trade on his screen that morning was a short position against a volatile tech company called Neuravox, a mid-cap artificial intelligence stock that had doubled in 6 months on retail hype and no earnings. Kyle had run his models, cross-checked the options flow, and decided the stock was a bubble waiting to pop. He was betting $7 million of firm capital, leveraged at 20 to 1. The position was so big, so aggressive, that one of the junior analysts had quietly asked whether they should run an additional stress test on the downside risk of a circuit breaker event. Kyle had laughed out loud. He told the analyst that circuit breakers were for amateurs who didn't understand liquidity cascades. He told him to go get him another espresso. Now, the cleaning crew comes through twice a day. Once at 6 in the morning before the market opens, and once at 2 in the afternoon, right when the New York session hits its peak chaos. The traders barely notice them. The women in gray uniforms move between the desks like ghosts, emptying trash bins, wiping down keyboards, replacing water bottles. To the men and women on the floor, they are part of the furniture, invisible extensions of the building itself. One of those women was a 57-year-old black woman named Pearl Thomas. She worked the afternoon shift, 5 days a week, $10 an hour after the agency took its cut. She had been cleaning that floor for just over 2 years. Before that, she had spent 15 years as a quantitative analyst at a major investment bank 3 blocks from here. She held a master's degree in financial engineering from Carnegie Mellon. She had built risk models for credit default swaps, designed early volatility forecasting algorithms, and once presented a paper at a conference in Geneva on nonlinear market impact functions. She had worn tailored suits, managed a team of 7, and earned a base salary of $240,000 a year with bonuses that doubled it. Then, in 2018, she was diagnosed with relapsing polychondritis, a rare autoimmune disorder that attacks the cartilage in the body. The treatment was aggressive and ruinously expensive. Her insurance covered most of it, but not all, and not the months of lost income when she couldn't work. The medical debt piled up. She sold her condo in Hoboken. She drained her 401k she filed for bankruptcy in 2020, and the bankruptcy court took everything except the clothes in her closet and a small pension that was protected by law. When she recovered enough to work again, the industry had moved on. A 5-year gap on a quant resume might as well be a lifetime. Nobody would hire her, so she took the cleaning job because the cleaning job was what was available. Pearl Thomas had been watching the screens for 2 years without anyone noticing. She could read a Bloomberg terminal from across the room, and she could read the arrogance of young men like Kyle Renshaw even closer. She had watched him build that short position over the course of a week, adding to it at ever more aggressive strikes. She had seen the same pattern before in 2007 at a desk not far from here, when a 33-year-old trader had made a similar bet and lost everything in an afternoon. She had been one of the analysts who rebuilt the model after the crash to figure out what went wrong. She knew exactly how thin the ice was. And on this particular morning, standing at the edge of the aisle with a mop in her hand, she saw the final order on his screen, the last block of put options that would push the leverage past anything the market could absorb if something unexpected happened. She saw it, and she made a decision. Pearl Thomas didn't raise her voice. She didn't wave her arms or demand the floor. She simply placed the mop in the bucket, wiped her hands on the front of her gray uniform, and took 4 quiet steps into the aisle. The hum of the server fans and the clicking of mechanical keyboards covered the soft sound of her rubber soles on the polished concrete, but not completely. Jard Kwan, a junior trader 2 desks over, noticed her first. He saw her pause beside Renshaw's rig, one hand resting lightly on the edge of his standing desk. He saw her mouth move, and he heard the words that would cost the firm more than any single trade all year. "You might want to hold." Renshaw snatched off his headset. The foam earpiece swung and hit the monitor arm with a dull thwack. He turned in his chair slowly, performing the turn for the audience, the way a man does when he knows the room is watching and wants to make sure they catch every frame. "Excuse me." He let the question hang, then looked her up and down with the theatrical slowness of someone who had been practicing contempt in a mirror since prep school. "Did you just give me market advice? You don't belong in this room, let alone in my trades. Go mop somewhere else." The laughter came fast. It always does when the person at the top of the food chain gives permission to be cruel. Ben Morrison, a senior analyst with a vest and a weak chin, laughed loudest. He slapped his desk and pointed at Renshaw as if to say, "This guy." The 2 associate traders nearest the kitchenette leaned into each other, repeating the line, "Go mop somewhere else," filing it away for slack later. Even the compliance officer on duty, a tired-looking man named Arthur Cho, glanced up from his terminal with a faint smile before looking back down. Nobody said a word in her defense. Not one person. Pearl Thomas didn't flinch. She didn't step back. She stood exactly where she was, hands folded now in front of her, the way she had once stood at a conference in Geneva after delivering a paper that 3 Nobel laureates had questioned for 45 minutes. She had learned a long time ago that the loudest voice in the room was rarely the smartest, and that time always told the truth. Renshaw turned back to his screen with the energy of a man who had just won a debate against an unarmed opponent. "All right," he said loud enough for the section to hear. "Let's close this out. Final tranche market order." He hit the execute key with a single index finger, the way a concert pianist strikes the final note of a sonata, and leaned back with his hands behind his head. The order confirmation flashed on the screen. 7 million notional, 20-to-1 leverage, 140 million in notional exposure. A monster. He was betting against Nura Vox at $42.17 a share, and he was certain it would be at 38 by lunch. 12 seconds later, the feed glitched. Not a small glitch. Not the kind of momentary data flicker that trading desks ignore a dozen times a day. This was a full exchange-level circuit breaker triggered by a surge in order volume that no one saw coming. A rogue algorithm at a market-making firm in Chicago had begun flooding the order book with buy orders for Nura Vox at escalating prices. A cascade error in its execution logic that nobody had caught because the junior developer who wrote the patch had been fired the previous Friday and had disabled the kill switch on his way out. The exchange systems, detecting the abnormal price spike, halted trading on the entire stock for 5 full minutes. Renshaw stared at the screen. The order status flipped from filled to suspended. The live P&L ticker froze. He leaned forward. What the hell is this? He clicked the refresh button, then clicked it again, then slammed the mouse down so hard that the battery cover popped off and skittered across the floor. The room went quiet. Not silent, not yet, but the kind of quiet that falls over a trading floor when something unexpected is happening and nobody wants to be the first to name it. Morrison stood up at his desk. "Kyle, did you have a stop loss on that?" Renshaw didn't answer. His jaw was tight. The 5 minutes stretched. The circuit breaker clock counted down on the exchange monitor, digits ticking backward like a bomb in a movie that everyone already knows is going to detonate. Pearl Thomas stood by the filing cabinet, her mop still in the bucket, her eyes on the same screen. When trading resumed, Nura Vox opened at $89.40 a share. It had more than doubled in the 5 minutes of silence, the price driven into orbit by the rogue buy orders that had stacked up while the exchange was frozen. The clearing algorithms processed the backlog in one massive sweep, and Renshaw's short position, his beautiful, aggressive, 20-to-1 leveraged short position, went from a paper profit of $30,000 to a catastrophic loss of $47 million in 8 seconds. The number turned red at the top of his blotter, and the red was so deep, so total that several people in the room would later describe it as the color of a wound that hasn't started to hurt yet. Renshaw didn't move. His face went pale, then gray, then a shade of white that made Jard Kwan text the floor's medic from his phone under the desk without taking his eyes off his own screen. Morrison sat down. The compliance officer stood up. Someone in the corner whispered the words "margin call," and the whisper traveled through the room like a lit fuse. Then Renshaw turned. He turned in his chair and he looked at the cleaning woman standing by the filing cabinet, and he saw her. Not the uniform, not the mop. He saw her face, the calm there, the utter absence of surprise, and something in his chest collapsed that had nothing to do with the money. He opened his mouth, and no words came out. The elevator doors opened at the far end of the floor, and Marcus Webb, the firm's 64-year-old chief risk officer, walked onto the trading floor carrying a coffee and a copy of the Wall Street Journal. He had been with Apex since the day it was founded. He had survived the dot-com crash, the financial crisis, and the flash crash of 2010, and he had seen every kind of disaster a trading desk could produce. He took one look at the frozen screen on Renshaw's monitor, one look at the P&L ticker bleeding red, and one look at the woman standing beside the bucket, and his face changed. "Pearl." He set the coffee down on the nearest empty desk. His voice was quiet, but the floor had gone so still that everyone heard him. "Pearl Thomas, is that you?" She turned. She looked at the man who had once been her counterparty on a structured credit desk in 2006, the man who had once called her one of the 3 sharpest risk minds on the street in front of an entire conference room full of people. She nodded once. "Hello, Marcus." The room absorbed the recognition in stages. First confusion, then disbelief. Then the slow, dawning horror of 80 people realizing simultaneously that the woman they had been ignoring for 2 years, the woman they had just watched their star trader humiliate in front of the entire floor, had forgotten more about the market than any of them would ever learn. Marcus Webb looked at Renshaw. Then he looked at the screen. Then he looked back at Renshaw with the particular expression of a man who has just discovered that the junior employee he had championed for promotion had blown a $7 million hole in the balance sheet, while ignoring direct advice from someone who could have prevented the entire disaster. He didn't yell. He didn't have to. The silence in the room was already louder than anything he could have said, but the real storm hadn't even started yet. Because in the server room 4 floors below, the firm's automated trade surveillance system had flagged the entire sequence: the option execution, the circuit breaker, the margin breach, and had already generated an incident report, timestamped to the millisecond, with attached audio from the floor microphones. The report was sitting in the inbox of the chief compliance officer, who was currently in a meeting with the SEC's New York Enforcement Division. And the entire thing, every word Renshaw had said, every laugh from his colleagues, every moment of Pearl's silence, was now a matter of federal record. The audio transcript landed in the SEC's Enforcement Division at 11:07 that morning. Not the sanitized version, not the Compliance Department edit with the profanity scrubbed and the context flattened into corporate-safe language. The raw feed, pulled directly from the floor microphones that Apex Capital had installed years ago to monitor trader communications, captured every syllable. The laughter, the sneering condescension, the word mop delivered like a slur, and underneath it the quiet, measured voice of a woman saying, "You might want to hold." By 11:30, an SEC investigator named Diane Okonkwo had flagged the incident for immediate review under the agency's newly expanded Market Conduct Authority. Apex Capital was already on a short probationary leash from a minor disclosure violation the previous year. This, combined with a $47 million loss triggered by a leverage ratio that should never have been approved, was gasoline on a smoldering fire. She scheduled an emergency preliminary inquiry call with the firm's legal counsel for 4 o'clock that afternoon. The subject line read, "Request for preservation of all communications, trading records and personnel files, matter Apex 202-50047. But while the regulatory machinery ground into motion, something else was already spreading faster than any government process could contain. Jard Kwan, the junior trader who had watched the entire exchange from 2 desks over, had recorded a 30-second clip of the incident on his phone. He hadn't planned to leak it. He had just sat there after the market reopened, staring at the red number on Renshaw's blotter, replaying the moment the cleaning woman had spoken and been mocked, and feeling something hollow and sick settle in his stomach. At 12:14, during his lunch break, he posted the clip anonymously to an industry forum on Reddit with a single line of text. "This is what a $47 million ego sounds like." The clip spread the way financial gossip always spreads in the 21st century, which is to say instantly, virally, and with the unstoppable momentum of a crowd that smells blood. By 1 o'clock, it had jumped from Reddit to X, where a prominent financial journalist with 500,000 followers quote-tweeted it with the caption, "The cleaning woman warned him." He laughed, then lost $47 in 8 seconds. This is the most expensive arrogance in Wall Street history. By 3 o'clock, the clip had been viewed 4 million times. The phrase "go mop somewhere else" was trending. Someone had already screen-grabbed a photo of Renshaw from a charity gala the previous year, grinning next to a Ferrari, and pasted it next to a clip from a cleaning product commercial with the caption, "He should have listened." Inside Apex Capital, the crisis unfolded in real time. Marcus Webb had pulled Renshaw into a glass-walled conference room at 11:15 and hadn't let him leave. The firm's general counsel, a sharp-featured woman named Elena Vasquez, joined them at 11:30, carrying a tablet with the incident report, the SEC letter, and the first news alerts about the leaked clip. Her expression was the kind of professional blankness that experienced lawyers adopt when they are looking at something that could destroy a career. Renshaw sat at the table, tie loosened. His earlier bravado collapsed into a slack-jawed silence. He kept starting sentences and not finishing them. "The firm has liability here," Elena said, her voice flat. "The position was outside your authorized risk parameters. The audio makes it a conduct issue, and the SEC is already asking about the surveillance logs." She turned the tablet around and slid it across the table. A Bloomberg headline, "Apex Capital Trader Loses $47 after ignoring cleaning lady warning." The story had picked up Pearl's name from an internal directory photo that someone inside the building had leaked. The reporter had already started digging. They knew she held a master's degree. They knew about the bankruptcy. They knew about the illness. Renshaw looked at the headline and made a sound that wasn't a word. Marcus Webb leaned back in his chair and looked at him the way a surgeon looks at a wound that has already gone septic. "Kyle, do you understand what this is? This isn't just a bad trade. This is a narrative. And the narrative right now is that the entire financial industry is a playground for arrogant men who will blow up 140 million in notional exposure rather than listen to a black woman with 15 years of experience. Your face is going to be the thumbnail on every YouTube documentary about market hubris for the next decade. Then the story took an even sharper turn, because the financial journalist chasing the story, a dogged freelancer named Camille Ruiz, had gotten hold of something nobody expected. The rogue algorithm that had triggered the circuit breaker, the faulty trading code from the Chicago market-making firm, was not a random piece of chaos. It was a volatility forecasting model that had been reverse-engineered from a proprietary system designed years earlier by one of the most respected quantitative teams on the street. The architect of that original system, the person whose foundational research had been adapted without credit or permission into the broken code, was a woman who had published the core algorithm in a well-cited academic journal in 2011. That woman was Pearl Thomas. Ruiz broke the story at 5:45 that evening, just as the markets closed. The headline read, "The algorithm that broke Kyle Renshaw was built by the woman he humiliated." The article detailed, with surgical precision, how Pearl's graduate thesis at Carnegie Mellon had laid the groundwork for a new kind of market impact model that predicted cascading feedback loops in high-frequency trading environments. The Chicago firm had licensed a stripped-down version of it through a third-party vendor, and the junior developer who had been fired and disabled the kill switch had been tasked with maintaining code he never fully understood. The system had malfunctioned exactly at the stress points Pearl's original research had warned about 12 years ago. She had predicted the failure that destroyed the man who mocked her. The internet combusted. The story wasn't just about a trader's mistake anymore. It was about poetic justice so perfect it read like fiction. The leaked clip, the multi-million-dollar loss, the hidden expertise of an invisible worker, and now the revelation that the very instrument of ruin was built on her intellectual foundation. The hashtag PearlNew trended worldwide. Meme accounts turned her into a folk hero. Universities began requesting her original thesis. The Carnegie Mellon Financial Engineering Department posted a tribute on their homepage. At Apex Capital, the board convened an emergency meeting by video call at 7 o'clock that evening. The CEO, a man named Sterling Holt who had built the firm over 30 years and was due to retire in 6 months, stared at the screen with the ashen expression of someone watching his legacy rewrite itself in real time. The decision was unanimous and took less than 20 minutes. Kyle Renshaw's employment was terminated effective immediately, all deferred compensation forfeited, and a public statement would be released expressing contrition and announcing a full internal review. Marcus Webb was dispatched to find Pearl Thomas and deliver a personal apology from the firm, along with an offer of a settlement generous enough to keep her from filing a discrimination lawsuit that would uncover even more uncomfortable truths about the firm's hearing practices. But when Marcus Webb went looking for her, the cleaning station on the 47th floor was empty. The mop was in the bucket, the gray uniform folded neatly on the shelf, and the employee badge she had worn for 2 years was resting on top of it with a single yellow sticky note attached. On the note, in handwriting that was steady and unhurried, were 3 words: "I'm not done." Pearl Thomas walked out of 1 Manhattan West through the service entrance on 33rd Street at 7:23 that evening. She did not look back. She had removed the gray uniform, but underneath it she wore a simple black blouse and slacks she had brought in a canvas bag that morning. As she stepped onto the sidewalk, the city's fading light caught the silver locket at her throat, the one she had worn through all of it, through the illness and the bankruptcy and the 2 years of being invisible. Inside was a photograph of her mother, a woman who had cleaned houses herself in Birmingham, Alabama, and who had once told her daughter, "Baby, let them laugh. One day, you'll write their textbooks." She hailed a taxi, not to the small apartment in Queens she had rented after losing her condo, but to the midtown offices of a law firm that had been waiting for her call. The firm specialized in class-action employment discrimination suits, and Pearl had quietly consulted with them 3 weeks earlier after another incident on the trading floor. A junior analyst had called her Aunt Jemima under his breath, and she had recorded it. She had been building a file, documenting the slights, the insults, the systemic disregard. The audio from that morning was not her first piece of evidence. It was simply the most devastating. The SEC's involvement was an unexpected gift. Her real target was the culture that had allowed a man like Kyle Renshaw to exist and thrive. She had not been planning to act so soon. But when the market gave her the moment, she took it. The next morning at 9 o'clock, her attorneys filed a complaint in federal court naming Apex Capital, Kyle Renshaw personally, and several senior executives for creating a hostile work environment, racial discrimination, and retaliatory conduct. The filing included the leaked audio, but also sworn statements from 5 other current and former cleaning staff, 3 of whom were women of color, detailing a pattern of disrespect and dehumanization that had festered for years. The complaint asked for $50 million in damages, a number that matched the loss on Renshaw's trade almost exactly, a symmetry the media seized on immediately. Sterling Holt, the CEO, held a press conference at noon. He stood at a lectern, his face tired, and read a statement accepting responsibility, promising reforms, and announcing that the firm would not contest Pearl's claims but instead enter into immediate mediation. He said that while Kyle Renshaw had been terminated, the blame ran deeper. The board had voted to establish a $20 million fund to support financial literacy and career reentry programs for women and minorities in finance. The fund would be administered by an independent board including Pearl Thomas if she accepted. In front of the cameras, he said the words nobody expected. "We were blind, and we nearly lost ourselves because of it." Renshaw disappeared from public view. His name was scrubbed from the firm's website by that afternoon. The Ferrari was reportedly repossessed 2 months later when he could no longer make the payments. The fractional jet share was liquidated. His LinkedIn profile went dark. Friends said he moved back to his parents' house in Connecticut. The video of his humiliation had been viewed over 80 million times. But the story never was just about one man's fall. The algorithm cascade that had blown up his trade sparked an SEC investigation into the Chicago market-making firm, which was fined $112 million and had its trading license suspended for 6 months. The junior developer who had disabled the kill switch was charged with computer tampering and sabotage. And in the aftermath, industry-wide circuit breaker protocols were revised to prevent the exact feedback loop Pearl's original thesis had predicted. She was invited to consult on those very revisions, an offer she accepted with a quiet nod. The most surprising detail emerged a year later, buried in a long profile of Pearl in the New York Times. She revealed that on the morning of the trade, she had not just given verbal advice. After Renshaw dismissed her, she had quietly written a note on a scrap of paper and tucked it under his keyboard during the confusion of the crash. The note read, "Cover at the halt. He never found it. The cleaners threw it away." She had known exactly what to do, and he had been too proud to even see her. That revelation sent another shock through the world, a final proof that the answer was always there, invisible to eyes trained to look only at those they considered worthy. Pearl Thomas used the settlement to establish a scholarship fund for first-generation college students pursuing quantitative finance, and she bought back her childhood home in Birmingham. She never cleaned another office. She still checks the markets every morning, but now she does it from a sunlit study in a house she owns outright, with a cat named Volker curled at her feet. And the locket, the one with her mother's picture, now holds a new inscription on the back, one she added herself after the case was closed. They laughed. "I wrote their textbooks." Somewhere in every building, in every office, on every trading floor, humming with the confidence of people who have never been told they don't belong, there is a voice that has been quietly carrying the answer the whole time. A voice folded into a gray uniform, a mop bucket, a life the world decided to look past. Pearl Thomas carried it for 2 years in silence, and when she finally spoke, a $47 million empire collapsed in 8 seconds. Not because she was lucky. because she was invisible, and invisibility had given her the one thing Kyle Renshaw had traded away years ago, the ability to see everything without being seen. So the question is not whether Pearl Thomas is exceptional. The question is how many more like her are still standing in the aisles, still folding their expertise into the quiet corners of rooms that refuse to acknowledge them. The next time you walk into a space and assume you know who matters, look again. The person holding the mop might have written the algorithm. The person emptying the trash might have built the model that brought you to your knees. And the only thing standing between you and the truth is whether you're willing to hear it from someone you never thought to ask. Drop your city and the time you're watching. I read every single one. And if you're new here, stay close. You'll want to see exactly what story we uncover next. If this one moved you, send it to someone who needs to remember that the loudest voice in the room is rarely the smartest. And tell me in the comments, when have you ever been underestimated? I want to hear your story. Subscribe now, because next week we're bringing you a story of a man who fooled an entire industry for 16 years, and nobody knew until the day he walked into the wrong room. Until then, may the quietest truths always find the loudest ears.